So please go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat, also with your name, school, and also what you're thinking about in terms of using the CTE Revite funds for this upcoming biennium. And while you're doing that, I'm going to introduce Karen Moskin, and she is going to let us know, talk about, oh, am I on the right one? Am I doing an RFA overview? It looks like it. My apologies. Not turning it over to Karen, but want to let everybody know there's just a quick overview here, and also that we have recently extended the deadline for CTE applications. It is no longer November 10th. It is Monday, January 10th, 2022, by 5 p.m. So we do have a webinar that talks about the submission process and also things to remember when submitting your application. So just be aware that that is the biggest news of this review. There is also a website where you can find the revised RFA. You can also find the frequently asked questions document, which is updated and will be updated again for your review. In addition, it will talk about eligibility, but also where you can find the technical assistance webinars that we've been holding so far, how to get in touch with the ODE CTE Revite team, and also any other information that you may have. Thank you for introducing yourselves in the chat, along with Kyle has put in a link to the presentation slides that we will be talking about today. Okay, so without further ado, Karen is going to start us off talking about CTE and equity. Karen?
Thanks, Gabby, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Karen Moskin. I'm a civil rights education specialist on the secondary, post-secondary transitions team at the Oregon Department of Education. So it's great to see you this afternoon, and we're going to talk a little bit about equity. We're going to start off by just revisiting the ODE education equity stance, which is what we base all of our work and any of the funding that we do, any of the grants, all that we do is based around this education equity stance, which talks about the equitable implementation of policies, practices, procedures, and legislation, and even calls out resource allocation, which is what grants are. And then we also want to point out that it mentions that we're going to be focusing on the educational opportunities for our historically and currently marginalized youth, students, and families. And this includes the civil rights protected classes. And that sometimes in order to do that, that means that we're going to need to really stop and look closely at the current systems that we have in which we are operating and see where we maybe need to make some changes. So next slide. This is just a slide that talks a little bit about, and you'll see it also in the application, the diversity that we have in Oregon and the representation of different students. And so it helps us to know how important it is that we're very mindful of our students and making sure that we're providing those opportunities. Next slide, please. So the most pivotal question for you to be asking yourself when it comes to equity is, how will this project increase participation, support, and retention of historically and currently marginalized students in your community? So as you're thinking about the project, or if you've already decided on the project, really your conversations need to be thinking about how is that going to help support our students or retain them, or else increase the participation when it comes to our CTE courses and other opportunities within CTE. Next slide. So one of the questions that we get asked quite a bit is, how do we show that, or how do we determine some of that? And so we wanted to show that there are several different types of data that you have available where CTE data is available, and helps you to understand and see the experiences that students are having within your schools. So some of those are looking at enrollment within the CTE programs compared to enrollment within total population. So let's say, for example, that your students of color, your BIPOC students are in CTE maybe 10%, but total population would be 40%. Then we can see that there's not the same sort of representation. And so that might be something for you to look at and think about. Maybe these are some ways that we can be helping to overcome some of these disparities or discrepancies that we see within that. There also are the 90% reports, the reports on who's participating in work-based learning, or else your CTE needs assessments as well for Perkins. Next slide. So the successful applicants for this will demonstrate that they understand their own communities by aligning the demographic data of your communities with your project outcomes. So that's why we talked a little bit about what kinds of data you have available. But we also want to be sure and point out that there are also other kinds of data that you can gather from your community. It might be from surveys, it might be from community meetings, it might be from focus groups. So there are a lot of other ways to collect information and data to help you to understand the local community that you're working with. And as you show that you understand your community and align the demographic data with it, please include within there a method for measuring and reporting the impact that's had on students. So the way that what you're doing will impact and help students, that will help to recruit, provide support for, or to retain historically and currently marginalized students. That's the same as what we called out in the pivotal question as well. And the next 3 slides are really going to just give some examples of what those might look like. These are in no way a requirement. These are just some examples because folks have asked, well, what might that look like? So go ahead and click it. I think they just come in one at a time, so you can go ahead and click them all. Your district might choose to offer a job fair that highlights employers of color or employers with disabilities. If you've determined that that's a place where you maybe could really use some help within your CTE programs. Maybe your district's going to start to include interpreters for the languages that are found within your community for any of the informational meetings or for any kinds of parent meetings or other meetings, or any recruitment materials that you have will be offered in the various languages of the community, and also feature pictures of the diverse populations that you have within your community. So those are a few of the many types of specific activities that you can do when it comes to recruitment. Next slide will give just a few of the examples that could help to provide support. So it might be that your district seeks information from the community, like we talked about, to understand the needs of the students and provide the necessary support. So that could be surveys, parent meetings, advisories, or like we said, focus groups. Or else you could also work with school counselors to meet with students and discuss any strengths or weaknesses that students see within their current programming. Next slide will tell us then about some examples of activities to help retain our students. So schools sometimes have exam and scheduling practices to ensure access for all courses. A lot of times we find that students who are in pull-out courses or are receiving other special services aren't able to stay within CTE, and when schools have examined their scheduling practices, they've been able to make enough changes to make it so those kinds of things can happen. Or it might be that schools are providing culturally responsive training for CTE teachers and counselors to be able to help students see themselves within what they're hearing and what they're learning about within their CTE courses. Or schools maybe are examining what kinds of barriers might there be for access, and those could include monetary barriers as well. So are there extra costs for these courses? Are there extra requirements that are playing out to require students to have to spend more money that maybe they don't have. I think there's one more on this slide. Thank you. Or again, schools need to just continue to listen to students and communities about their needs. So all of these are just, again, a few of the many different possibilities that you can do that are specific to your community. And all really are just going to be revolving around this pivotal question for you to respond to on how will this project increase participation, support, and retention of historically and currently marginalized students in your community. And that will help you to fill out this section that's based on equity. But I'm also hoping that you'll consider to think about that equity stance that we spoke about, and also whatever equity lens or equity stance your schools have in place as you work throughout the entire application and the project. We're now going to turn some time back over to Gabby to talk to us about the reporting process. And thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Karen, for your time and also sharing those key components around CTE and equity, especially when it comes to CTE here in Oregon and also the Revitalization Grant. So we are going to be transitioning now into what Karen mentioned around especially data and how to collect data, not just for CTE programs of study, but what we'll be asking and looking for as a part of the Revitalization Grant. This is a snippet from our timeline of activities and the biennium for the 2021-23 revitalization period. These are subject to change, which hopefully we're all used to right now and how quickly things can change. But know that we will be asking for quarterly updates, if you will, reports that you will submit through Smartsheets. The notifications of when those will be happening and due will come from our office to let you know, along with a link to submit your information. Each one of these reports, you'll see that we will always be looking for bright spots. So anything from news articles, media resources, even just to stories about either a startup program, student stories, student success stories, partnerships, everything that pretty much every topic or thing that you see here is something that you'll be answering and talking about in your application anyway. And this is just a way for us to continue to check in and hear more about that experience and also collect that information as we turn it into the legislature to continue supporting CTE revitalization and to also allocating funds to continue this grant program. So again, these are the dates when we expect things to start happening, but just know that they are subject to change, but we will do our best as time permits to let you all know if and when things change and what that looks like. Please note, though, that we do have hard deadlines for spending. And I know that we said we were going to be a broken record on this, and we'll continue to do so in terms of all grant funds need to be expended by June 30th, 2023. And that is just my quick slide and section. And now I'm going to hand it over to Kyle and Dan, who are going to talk a little bit more in detail about the budget worksheet and how to use that when submitting your application. Dan?
Thank you very much, Gabby. I'm Dan Findlay. I am head specialist at ODE and on the CTE team, and also have invested a lot of time over the years in CTE revitalization, which is why you're all here and why we love this work. So we're going to go ahead and dive into a little bit of a conversation about the budgeting aspect of it. So our first slide here, there are several components in the budget element, one of them being the budget worksheet. The budget worksheet is a required item, as all of your plans need to have a budget. You have to have an idea of how much money you need to address your goals. So the budget worksheet is required because the budget evaluators need to see that as well, but it will not be scored separately. It's a supporting document that provides critical information about how you need to invest funds in order to take care of the learners in your area and to achieve the goals of your program of study, be it a startup or taking the full program to a higher level. It does add context for reviewers. We do point out that matching funds are not required, although many of you have probably become proficient in or very interested in the concept of grading funds, such as using Student Success Act funds, high school success, and other sources of monies to help achieve the goals. Many times, a district will choose to do a match in order to help support the venture, or one of the partners. And those partners, of course, can be post-secondary, but more than likely you'll have supporting matching funds coming from business, labor, and industry concerns who are very interested and intricately involved in what you're doing. That's counted as an indicator of support, and it gives the evaluators a little bit better idea of the type and the depth of the support that's available. Also, we remind you when you're putting together your budget worksheet, think about sustainability when building the grant concept. It's extremely important to have an idea of what's going to happen after the grant period ends. Revitalization grant funds last for biennium, but the program that you're building may last for years, so it's best to be prepared. Next slide, please. So here we have a very tiny inset of the budget worksheet. Sorry about this. This appears as one of the appendices, Appendix E in the RFA document. Those of you who have downloaded it already have probably taken a look at this. It's simple and straightforward. We kept it pretty uncomplicated, but it should also be something that will be familiar enough to your fiscal people that it will be easy to leverage this into your work. Next slide. So the budget narrative is really the heart of it. It's the story behind the numbers. It's something that allows us to link costs and investments to the proposed activities and outcomes in your plan. So examples would include equipment that you purchase, improvements that are made to physical plant, professional and technical services that are necessary to support the work. This could be professional development. This could be investments necessary to help secure licensure for a CTE teacher, supplies and materials that you can use within the program. Curricula, as occasionally programs will purchase curriculum materials, or they will invest in having those developed by others. And staff expenses. Topping off an existing budget is sometimes done in order to make it possible to do something, and occasionally shorter duration individuals will be brought into position to help with the transition in the program. Next slide. One required meeting, yes, one required meeting, and tentatively it's set for February 24th, 2022. And the grant team that attends this meeting is a minimum of 2 individuals who must be in attendance and will represent the grant team from that institution. It's currently set up as a virtual meeting, as we don't really have an idea of what things are going to look like at that point. Should it come to pass that we do this as an in-person meeting or it's a hybrid environment, in which case you're welcome to attend if you can, Revite funds may be used to defray associated costs for travel, meals, and housing, and also substitutes for teachers who may be traveling in support of the grant. And then I think we have another slide. Budget for infrastructure projects. Infrastructure projects, building something, remodeling something, it's really important to provide evidence in the budget narrative that this has been reviewed by appropriate fiscal staff or contractors who are proficient in working with these types of projects. One of the perhaps disquieting aspects of doing grant development is that the costs of building things, of appending things to your existing buildings, and doing a variety of different types of work can possibly change in the process of doing the grant. People over time have noted that they've had to adjust budgets, find additional funds, that sort of thing, because of the increased costs of construction. Right now, most of us are dealing in one way, shape, or form with supply chain issues that are also hitting the bottom line in many projects. So it's important to have as much information and the best information possible to make sure that your numbers are as accurate as they can be. While official bids are not required, you should do your homework and make sure that you have the best information possible and check it as frequently as necessary to make sure that you are on track with where you want to go. And I think that is our last budget slide. And it is.
Thanks,
So
Dan.
at this point, pass it back to Gabby.
Thanks, Dan. Yes, so that really covers our portion of today's technical assistance call. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen. And this is where I think we can ask if you have questions, would like to learn more, clarify anything, to please let us know. Linda has put in the chat the email address. If you haven't already emailed us and have any follow-up questions, you can contact us there, but we'll open the floor for questions, comments, concerns. Yes, Adam.
Hey, thank you. I have two questions. It's on page 16 and page 17 of the RFA. And the first question has to do on page 16, sections E and sections F. My assumption is that all that information is going to be typed up and presented in Appendix F, and eventually on the submission date or prior to that, submitted as an individual appendix. There's not actually going to be any typed up paragraph form narrative for sections E and F. Does that sound like a correct assumption?
Yes.
Thank you. And then the second question is on page 17. So section 4, section G, and it says use table in appendix G. And on the second line, it refers to section D of the narrative. And section D of the narrative has to do with partnerships. And I was wondering if that was a typo, or if I just didn't drink enough coffee today and can't match that to where it's supposed to go.
Sure. I don't know if Linda or Kyle is happening to look at the RFA and see what, I thank you for your patience, Adam, as I know some of us are on single screens and others are trying to look, but just want to see if Linda can see what he's referring to.
It does look like project outcomes are section E as in eagle, not D as in dog.
Okay.
So apologies for that.
Thank you for catching that. And we can maybe indicate that on the FAQ, the next round that goes out, just to clarify that.
Thank you so much.
No, thank you.
I have a question. We've received a CTE grant for building trades about 10 years ago. And so would that be seen as a continuation if we applied for another one in building trades again? Would that be allowable, or should we not waste our time?
what about the building trades? What was the money used for specifically the first time?
To get our program going as far as building a house. And now we want to branch out to do more specific areas in like telecommunications and building and the piece of utility, and not as much of the construction side, but another facet of that.
Yeah, so that would be different. That would be a new project. So yes, you can apply, and in the response about being a past recipient, you would obviously let us know when and what you focused on and how this application is different, even though it might be titled building trades, or we can try to change it to something else. You would say now we're working on a different facet of home building, which would be around utilities or telecommunications, like you just said.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
One more question, I guess.
Yeah.
Is it allowable? I know in the past it's been allowable to buy equipment like vehicles or something like that. Would it be allowable in this as well if we had permission and showed justification?
So yes, and what we've asked is that if you are thinking about using the CT Rewrite funds for purchasing a vehicle or any kind of public construction improvement projects, that you connect with us and we have a quick 30-minute discussion about what you're thinking about doing, justification like you've mentioned, and just some brainstorming and some ideas and things to consider before moving forward. But yes, you can use the funds for that, but we would like to just have a time to meet and hear more about it. So if you don't mind emailing us, we can get that scheduled.
Okay, thank you.
Cool. Okay. Well, we will have a office hours session next Tuesday, same time, 3 to 4. We don't have an agenda for that. It's just to pop in if you have questions, and then leave if you'd like to. We probably will be scheduling a few more of those now that the application deadline has been extended, so that we can provide support to you all when needed, when getting your applications together. And if you don't have questions now, but obviously if you think of them along the way, you can please email us at the email address that Linda put in the chat, and also through any individual emails as well. But if nobody else has any questions, comments, or concerns, I think we can go ahead and stop the recording, Kyle. And I would just ask the ODE staff to stay on, and we can say good afternoon. And hopefully you see this as a gift of time for the rest of you this afternoon. So we really appreciate you being here, and look forward to your applications coming in a couple months.